once again. And here we go. So welcome again. My name is Rosa Armendariz. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the Dean of Student Engagement and Equity here at DVC. And I am so excited to share our Welcome Day program with you this evening. And I would also like my colleague, Kenyatta, to introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. We're excited to have you here with us tonight. We have over 70 participants, and we have more that I know will be joining us soon. My name is Kenyatta Tribble. I'm the Senior Dean at the DVC San Ramon campus, and I too would like to welcome you to this event tonight.
Thank you, Kenyatta. And while we've all gotten very used to working online and in hybrid formats, you know that technology often does funny things. So work with us as we go through the program, but I'm hoping we have a smooth program this evening. And to kick us off, I want to congratulate all of you for choosing DVC. This is a very exciting time in your life, in your students' life, and we're proud that you have chosen to start this educational journey with us at DVC. In today's program, we're here to share important knowledge and resources for you and for your students so that you can have a successful first year at DVC, especially during this hybrid, mostly online environment. And we know that in the last year, all of us have experienced, or year and a half, we've experienced quite a bit of transition, but I think we've become quite expert in learning how to be flexible. And Welcome Day is one of our favorite events and activities to host on campus. And of course, my phone would ring right when I'm doing the welcome. But it is one of our favorite events because we get to meet all of you and welcome you to our college campus. College is a very exciting time, and I remember my college years very fondly. And we're eager to interact with you and to meet you today through this webinar, but hopefully at the beginning of the semester in person on campus. And you'll get to learn more of the details of the services that are open for you on campus. And one last reminder before we dive into the program is that if your student hasn't signed up for the student component of Welcome Day, please have them go to the DVC website to register. We have 2 sessions coming up, one this Friday, August 13th, and a second on August 20th. And there are also additional workshops on different topics that will happen during the Saturday after and throughout the week. So please go back and check out the website, have your students register. All of the information that we share with you at Welcome Day is very important. And next slide, please. So our focus for today is going to be to cover a few details with you. First, some information about DVC, some information on our interest areas or majors, tips for you as parents of new college students, expectations for the semester and some of the things to look forward to, hopefully, information on student confidentiality, what we call FERPA, and 2 special presentations by 2 of our favorite people on campus, Jesus Gutierrez from Financial Aid and Tina Wade from Transfer and Career, one of our counselors. Next slide. Since we are on a webinar format, we also invite you to ask us questions by using the Q&A or the chat option on your screen. You can type in questions, and we have several other employees from across the campus who are available to answer questions. And then those of us presenting will also look at the questions and try to address them as we go. So feel free to jump in with those questions. At the end of each segment, we will also allow for about 10 minutes for you to ask us additional questions. Okay, next slide, please. And I will pass it over to Kenyatta.
So good evening again. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about DVC. As you heard, I work at the San Ramon campus, and I do like to say often that DVC is one college with two campuses. So we have our campus in Pleasant Hill and we have our campus in San Ramon, but we're one college, we're all DVC. So no matter which campus your son or daughter are going to, or we welcome them to DVC. And often most of our students after their first year at the San Ramon campus, they actually take classes on both campuses. They usually start here to avoid the traffic and then go to the Pleasant Hill campus later, depending on their major. But we're really excited to be working together as a team. So as you probably know, DVC has lots of different majors and degree options for students. And Rosa mentioned earlier about interest areas. In the next slide, I will talk a little bit about that. But if you see on this slide, we have over 30 associate transfer degrees, over 70 associate degrees, and we have actually a lot more than 35 career technical or career education certificates degrees as well for students. And so that's a lot for students to navigate. And so I'll talk a little bit more about interest areas and how the college has began to prepare students to really help them on choosing a major. You probably know DVC is one of the top transfer community colleges in the Bay Area. We often talk about being one of the #1 transfer schools to UC Berkeley and to UC Davis and lots of other institutions, not just in California, even out of California as well. And you'll hear more from Tina regarding that as well. But we do pride ourselves in our transfer, and we also really appreciate all the work that Tina and others have been doing with our Associate of Transfer degrees that has really assisted us with having more students transfer seamlessly and not taking classes that they don't need to take. We have top-notch instructors at DVC, both campuses. Our instructors are here because they want to teach. So at a lot of the four-year colleges, the instructors are doing a lot of research, and that's great for students when they really know what their major is and they're really ready to dive into that they can really have an instructor that may have some research that they can participate in. We have faculty that have their doctorate degrees, but yet they really love teaching. And we're committed to continuing to support our faculty. As you know, with the pandemic, we were forced to go online. And so during that transition, we did a lot of training with our faculty so that they can become effective online instructors. They were all trained on that, but now that we're doing more face-to-face and in person, we're continuing to support our faculty in both ways. We have a really active student life, and even during the pandemic, we were able to still have students engage in student life, and that's really important. So we had over 60 clubs last year. Students can join a club that exists, or they can create their own club. So we want to really talk about that. And I think one of our moderators here can answer some questions about clubs because he works in that area. And then we just have a lot of support services and accessible services for students as well. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about those services. So last year, we talked a lot about our online student support, and we learned a lot during this year, last year. And so there's some things that we decided that we will continue. We can't continue them as robustly, as we would like as staff try to navigate being on campus and online. But there are some things that we learned and we will continue to do. So on this slide, you see a picture of a little image. That's our chat feature. And that feature is on pretty much every major web page on our college website. And there are staff that are there to answer questions for students. If they have a quick question, they can chat with someone there. It's on our main website, and it can be filtered to different locations as well. If you go on other websites, you can find that information there as well. So please tell your son or daughter to use that chat feature if they have questions. The hours may change, but beginning of the year, we're really active in making sure that we do have that still accessible to our students. We are going to be in person. Again, we're already on campus. We started being on campus last week. All of our staff and our offices are open to help students. So we're open, and we have our academic support center that is actually a center where there's no wrong door. That's what they say about the academic support center. And we have one on both campuses. It's really a place where students can go get a free snack. They can talk to faculty. Some faculty have their office hours in the ask. They can get tutoring. So that has been open throughout the pandemic to support our students. We also, because of the ask and because of our focus on interest areas, we're also developing Student Success Center for all of our interest areas as well. We may talk a little bit more about that. And I do want to mention our learning communities. We have these communities built for students to build community. And we still have spaces in some of our learning communities that we have for this year. For instance, we have a first-year experience learning community that's really built around different interest areas. These students are able to take classes in a cohort with other students. The faculty work together to make sure that they're doing what's best for the students. So it's a really, really great program for students to participate in. We have Emoja for our African-American students. We have Puente. We have Mesa for our math, engineering, and science achievement students. And there's just lots and lots of learning communities. So there's still spaces in a lot of our learning communities. So if students are interested, please have them look for those communities. And we have a webpage for that. We have our online and in-person support services. As I mentioned, we've been open since last week back on our campuses. So our admissions and records office is open, including an enrollment lab. Our counseling will be, it's online right now, but we will have some in-person counseling when the fall semester starts. Our Career and Transfer Center will be offering services. Our disability support services has been continuing to offer services for our students and financial aid as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so interest areas, you heard that a couple of times, and that's something that we're really, really proud that we're moving in this direction. Basically, students go to college and they don't always know exactly what they want to do. I know I changed my major several times. I thought I was going to be an engineer at one point, and maybe I should have, I don't know. But so people change their mind. They take classes, they get to know other subjects, and they may choose something different. But usually someone knows what they like. So our interest areas are clusters of majors that are similar, and it allows for the students who are interested, for instance, in art, communication, and language to be in a cluster. And we will have success centers for all these different interest areas. So again, faculty will be having office hours here. There'll be some support services. It's really for them to build community and interest within that major and get to know a lot about it. They're not locked into a major, so if they do change their mind, like many of us have, that's fine too. So we have our business, computer science, and culinary, our math and engineering, science and health, and then we have social sciences. On the last slide, I mentioned the Ask Center. The Ask Center is really for those who are really not sure. They're undecided, so we still have support for them as well while they're choosing their major. But this is something that we're doing to guide students. If they know something that they're interested in, there's different levels. They may know, I like to work with my hands and I want to do something within the culinary, but they don't know exactly what. They can be a part of that cluster, but again, they're not locked in. So just something that you can make sure that you tell your son or daughter about as well. Next slide, I think I'm turning it back over to Rosa.
Thank you, Kenyatta. So as we've already emphasized, beginning college is an exciting time for students. And many of us remember college as one of the best times of our life, maybe also a time when we learned a few lessons. And we also recognize that transitioning into college can be scary for both the student and the family. And as you and your student transition into college, particularly in this very unique time that we're experiencing as a world, we remind you that this is a time of change, but it's a good change. You are your student's #1 fan. You're there to serve as a coach and as a guide for your student. We're here to also support you in that process. But it's also a time for us to learn to let go a little bit. And I know that quite well as a parent myself. Just today, I ordered school supplies for my children, and I realized that I needed to let them do a little bit more in that process. I didn't need to do it all, right? But our tendency is to take care of them and to try to make sure that things work out for them. So as we begin to dive into what the DVC experience will be like, I would invite you to reflect on how you can also transition a bit to empower your students to make decisions and to support them in this transition into college, to make decisions on their own, to navigate the questions that they will be experiencing. Next slide, please. Some examples of how to support your student based on what we just discussed earlier are on this slide. And as Kenyatta noted, DVC offers many support services, both in person and online, for tutoring, for counseling, study areas. Encourage your students to seek out those services earlier. Ask them about what they're learning in their classes. areas where they might need support, what they are asking questions about themselves. And try not to pick their classes if you're still choosing classes for the fall or later. Let them decide on what they want to explore. Don't edit their papers as an example, but rather encourage them to sign up for an appointment at the ASK, our Academic Success Center as an example, or to find tutoring services. Another very important piece is to talk with faculty, with their professors. Encourage them to reach out to faculty, whether it's through email or through office hours. And the earlier a student meets with a faculty member, the better. Faculty like to get to know students. They want to know their names. And a little bit of research on that, students who faculty know their name tend to get better grades. There's some psychology behind that. Ask about their courses and how they're doing. Like I mentioned, what are they learning? What are questions that they have, rather than focusing just on the grades. And a very important piece is also finding a dedicated time and space for studying. And I know in the last year and a half that we've all been mostly at home, it is sometimes hard to find a space for our own work or for studying. But designate a space, wherever that might be in the house, or now that DVC is also open for use, maybe there's a location on campus that they would like to study. And the last bit is, as it was also noted earlier, to encourage your student to get involved. There are a lot of clubs and activities happening online and in person. Our Associated Student Government is very active on campus, and encourage them to look up those programs and activities. They can see all of it online and connect. We're also happy to connect students if there's questions. And I'll note as a final thought is that college students are most successful when they are full-time students, when they find community on campus, whether it be a club or a learning community or a group of friends, and when they work no more than 15 to 20 hours per week. So as you think about all of this and your role as a coach for your student, you can think about how to encourage those behaviors for your student. Next slide. And these are some highlights, I think, of a lot of the things that I've already noted. College is also a time for their students to learn how to manage their own time and how to make decisions, take responsibility. They will have a few bumps along the road, I'm sure. And if one of my colleagues in the math department at Los Medanos College used to say that it was important to have a first fail. That first C or D or sometimes F is a lesson for students and often the motivation that they need to do better. I'm not encouraging that happen, but it's also just a note that there will be bumps in the road, and we're there to support our students to learn through that and hopefully to learn how to do things better. Next slide. So as we noted, time is really important. Time management for all of us is important, but in college it's quite crucial. And many students feel that taking online courses will be easier or a lighter load. So if your student is taking some classes online, maybe a combination, we want to emphasize how important it is to support your student in managing their calendar and their time. For each unit that a student is in class, they should be studying or doing classwork for about 2 to 3 hours outside of class. So as you see here in this sample schedule, that means that for a full-time schedule, if your student is taking 12 or 14 units, they're in school or doing school work for about 40 plus hours a week. That's a full-time job. So your student needs to be able to commit to that. They also need to be able to find time to eat, to sleep, to socialize, to find time to spend with family. And so this could be a really good exercise to think through with your student as they plan their schedule. whether they're part-time, taking maybe 1 or 2 classes, or taking a full load. Take into consideration all of the details and time that they're going to need to focus on in school. And hopefully your role as a parent and as a guide will be to help them make smart choices about how they spend their time, where they spend their time. Next slide, please. So the other important thing to note is all of the online supports that we are still offering for our students. We have a technology loan program that offers laptops, calculators, headphones, webcams, and some Wi-Fi hotspots as well. So if you need any of this technology, you can access this information on our website. We have an FAQ page. A student can sign up for that and request one of these technology devices. And whether your student is taking classes online or in person, there is an online component to all of our courses, and we use a platform called Canvas, which is where instructors often post all of the information for the classes, including the syllabus, grades. There's often chats or conversations with the faculty and students. So it's important for your student to learn about Canvas and how to use it, which they will learn a bit more during the student welcome day. And there are also badges that students can receive if they take these small trainings on how to utilize Canvas. So we encourage you to look into that. If your student hasn't learned about Canvas, you might want to ask them, have you checked out the information and the resources for how to use it? And all of this information is on our website. We realize we're giving you a lot and we're talking a lot at you through the webinar, but if there's any questions, put them in the chat, and then you can always come back to the website as well to get more information. And we will transition back to Kenyatta.
Okay, thank you. I get to talk about FERPA. So this is about the confidentiality that students have as college students, regardless of their age. And I think Rosa put it well. It's really a time where we want to think of parenting as coaching. So unlike the K-12 system where parents had access to any information about their student, that is no longer when they enter college, again, regardless of their age. If you had a son or daughter who took classes concurrently at DVC, you probably are aware of that already. And sometimes that's a challenge for parents because they may have set up their account, did their application, know all their passwords, and want to do things to support their students. And we know that that's because you want them to be successful, just as we want them to be as well. But we do want you to know that even though you may have access on the back end, when it comes to the college, then you will not be able to get information without the consent of the student. So we wanted to make sure that you knew that. That's federal law, and that's called FERPA, Family Education Act. So there's lots of information that we're giving you here, and this is one reason we're having this parent workshop, is because we want you to be aware of these things, and we want you to be able to support your son or daughter as they go through this major transition, because again, we want them to be successful. So just some highlights about FERPA and what it stands for: the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It is a federal law that's been around since 1974. And it basically means that we cannot release any information about a student unless the student has written consent. And there's more information about FERPA on the Admissions and Records website, and actually a form that can be signed if the son or daughter decides to sign it for a one-time or for a longer period of time. But we don't, we hear from our instructors when we have students that are maybe in high school and taking college classes, like, this parent emailed me and said I'm giving them too much work. Do what you can to coach your son or daughter. Help them, with the email, but let them send the email. Help them find the resource, but let them do the work. We really want them to be successful, and we really want you to be a partner and a coach in doing so. So again, you can find more information about FERPA on the Admissions and Records website. Next slide. Okay, I think we're open for some questions. As I think Rosa mentioned earlier, we have some time in between all the segments to answer a few questions. And I know we've had a group that's been answering some questions offline, trying to see if there's any that they wanted us to answer live. One question that I think was dismissed, and I'm not sure if the person found the answer, but I don't see an answer to, was when and how do I pay for classes? So the student can pay for classes in person or online, and they can pay for it online through their Insight portal. There's a tile that will, when they register, that will allow them to pay for that. So they would need a credit card. It might be yours. So this is where you're still a parent and they might ask you for money if they need it. They can use a credit card. They can also pay in person at the cashier's office or admissions and records as well. So that's how they would pay for classes. And typically we say that the fees are due at the point of registration, but technically they're not always due until it's time for the student to register again. So for instance, if they're registered now, before they can register for classes for the next semester, there would be a hold until they pay those fees. And if there's more to add, please chime in, Rosa, or anyone.
And it looks like there's a question about FERPA. Oops, and I just lost it on here. Did it get
So
answered?
I think I kind of answered that a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
You are allowed to pay for your son or daughter's classes. So does FERPA apply to payment confirmation? The student will get the confirmation and they can print it out for you, but they can use your credit card. So hopefully that answers that question. And you can get the receipt and use it for reimbursement.
Okay. So the confirmation will go to the student's email and you can access it through there.
And we have some questions about transfer and financial aid, and those sections are later, so we can leave those questions if they're not answered during the presentation.
Right. Yeah, I think we can transition to the next two presentations, which should cover some of these questions as well. And then we can have our chat folks type in additional answers as they come in.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kenyatta. So up next, we have Jesus Gutierrez from the Financial Aid Office. And Jesus, I think you have access to Drive.
Yep, thank you, Rosa. Hi, everyone. My name is Jesus. I work in the Dvc Financial Aid Office. We're giving you some financial aid information, mostly general stuff. So the main outcome for this presentation, just to learn more about financial aid, as well as highlighting the Ft3 program available at DVC/within the district. So to apply for financial aid, if you haven't done so, if your student hasn't done so already, most students are going to fill out what's called the Fafsa. So that's for U.S. citizens, eligible non-citizens, which include permanent residents, U.S. nationals, and a bunch of other examples, but I just include those two. And then to access the Fafsa, you can either Google it or go to fafsa.gov. And to access the Fafsa, and then a student will just going to create an account and then start answering the questions. So make sure that the student has their personal information, for example, their legal name, date of birth, social, all that good stuff. And then if there are any undocumented students that haven't applied for financial aid yet, they can apply using the California DREAM Act application. So they just have to, basically those are undocumented students that have graduated a California high school, and this also includes DACA recipients as well. And so to access the California DREAM Act application, students head over to caldreamact.org, or again, they can simply Google a California DREAM Act application and they will be able to access the form. And same thing, they'll need to create an account first. So they'll need the name, date of birth, stuff like that, personal information to create the account, and then they'll be able to access the application. So when to apply. So assuming all of you are here because your student is attending fall 21 or even spring 22. So that application opened up October 1st of last year, and the deadline is until June 30th of 2022. So still some time if you haven't done so already. And the priority deadline is for state aid, which in this case is obviously California, so is always March 2nd. So the March 2nd deadline already passed. And so to receive state aid, students have to meet the March 2nd deadline of submitting their FAFSA or their DREAM Act application. And then this particular academic year for financial aid will require 2019 income and or tax information. And then for next year, for the academic year 22 to 23. That application opens up October 1st of this year. So in a couple months, so students can actually get a head start on that and get that going. And then students will meet the March 2nd deadline of 22 to meet the state aid deadline. And then that will require 2020 income information. And so the types of financial aid available, there are grants. Grants are money that may not need to be repaid back to the college. So for example, the maximum for the 20 to 21 academic year for the Pell Grant, which is a federal grant, it was $6,495. The Cal Grant, which is a state grant, which requires GPA verification, as well as the student meeting the March 2nd deadline. And there's also, for example, the California Promise Grant, which is only available at California community colleges, and that waives tuition fees. There's also the option for work study, so a student can get a job on campus, for example, and then instead of getting paid out of the office's budget, for example, they're actually getting paid through financial aid. So I know a lot of offices like federal work study students, so they can so they have more money on budget to do other stuff within the office. There are also loans, which are obviously borrowed funds that are paid back with interest. And then there are scholarships available at DVC, external ones as well as internal ones. And then the amount and the application process vary depending on the type of scholarship that the student is applying for. And then we also have the Ft3 program, which stands for first time full-time free tuition. So a student has to be a first-time college student, and they have to enroll in a minimum of 12 units for the fall term or the first term, which may be spring for some students. They have to submit a Ft3 pledge, submit a financial aid application, so either a Fafsa or a DREAM Act application. They also have to be a California resident or otherwise exempt from paying non-resident tuition fees. So for example, being coded as AB 540, but for most students, it's being considered a California resident by the college. And then at the end of the semester, if the student completes at least 12 units with a 2.0 GPA or higher, then they'll receive a refund of their tuition. And the program covers the first 2 years of enrollment. So for example, if the student starts this fall, it would be fall 21, spring 22, fall 22, and spring 23. Summer isn't included in Ft3, so it's just fall and spring, but it's the first 2 years of enrollment. And so for financial aid tips, everyone should apply. Don't assume that you don't qualify. The application is free, so you literally have nothing to lose. And then also, even if you don't have access to your tax information, the Fafsa has what's called the Irs Data Retrieval tool. So basically, the Fafsa links up with the IRS, and the IRS sends over your information, your tax information, over to the student's Fafsa. And then the average time to complete the Fafsa is about 30 minutes, but I've seen students finish it within like 10 or 15 minutes. So kind of depends on whether or not you have all your information in front of you when filling out the Fafsa. So, but still 30 minutes is not that long. And then also parents are going to have to provide their income information on their student's Fafsa or DREAM Act application. So regardless of how much support is provided by the parents, a student is still going to be considered dependent for financial aid purposes, unless the student is 24, married, has kids or other dependents, that are enrolled in a master's or doctorate program, a veteran, or they are an orphan in legal guardianship, emancipated minor, foster, or homeless youth. And then to receive the best financial aid award package for every academic year, the student will want to submit the Fafsa or the DREAM Act application plus your GPA verification form, and submit both of those by the March 2nd deadline to also be eligible for the state aid from the state of California, and they'll be able to receive the best financial aid award package. So just basically 3 simple steps. I know it can seem daunting or complicated, but if you break it down that way, it definitely makes it more manageable to understand financial aid and how to apply for it year after year. So if you have any, right now we'll have time for questions. Use the Q&A feature. It's worth noting that as Kenyatta mentioned, we do have to follow FERPA guidelines. So the student will, if you have specific questions regarding your student, the student will have to contact us, as in the financial aid office, so they can call us or send us an email from their DVC email, and then we'll be able to help them out with those questions. So just one thing worth noting, just because this week I've noticed a lot of parents calling in, but we need the student to be on the phone or the student just, or for it to just be the student in order for us to answer their questions. So I'll check if there are any questions in the chat feature. So I see if financial aid covers books, do we have to buy the books first and get reimbursed? So if a student is eligible to receive a disbursement, for example, through the Cal Grant, they can use those funds however they want to. So it could be for books, supplies, gas, any educational costs, basically. So financial aid doesn't reimburse for that kind of stuff. So it's basically up to the student if they're eligible to receive cash aid to basically that's up to them how they want to spend that money. Another question, we apply for Fafsa during college app process. Do you have to reapply? If you already applied for the academic year, there's no need to reapply. So just a one-time thing. And then there's a DSS question. And then is Ft3 based on financial need or can anyone get it regardless of current income? So basically the Ft3 program is for basically students can get tuition free one of two ways, either the California Promise Grant or the Ft3 program. So if a student is eligible for the California Promise Grant, then we'll award them that grant. And then if a student isn't eligible for the California Promise Grant, then they'll be eligible for the Ft3 program. That's why we have students submit the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, so we know which one they're eligible for. So it is based on financial need, but it's it depends on the student and their situation with the FAFSA or DREAM Act application. See another one. How do you apply for the Cal Grant aid? Is it automatic after applying for FAFSA? So as mentioned before, students have to apply by March 2nd every single year. That includes their FAFSA or DREAM Act application, as well as submitting their GPA verification form. So if a student, for example, was a senior student this past academic year, then the high school would have needed to submit their GPA to the state of California. So follow up with the high school if that's a situation. But yeah, so basically it has to be done every year, and the student will need to make sure that those basically those two steps are done year after year. What is the deadline to apply for the first time program? Do you apply once or every year? I'm assuming you're referring to the Ft3 program. So you submit the pledge once, and then if the student is eligible, as in they complete the 12 units, get a 2.0 GPA, they'll automatically roll over semester after semester. They just have to make sure that they meet the academic requirements and that they submit a financial aid application every single year. So basically just those 2 years. How is the reimbursement of the Ft3 program made, and how do you get confirmation that they're accepted for Ft3? So the reimbursement works is so basically if the student pays for the tuition up front, for example, before they may be eligible for Ft3, then later on, if they are eligible, then the college will reimburse them. So for example, if they're paying in cash, they'll get a check in the mail. If they're getting paid, if it's paid through a credit card, then they'll get a credit back on that card. And then a student isn't officially into Ft3 unless they meet the academic requirements, which is, requires them to actually go through the whole semester. So they have to complete at least 12 units and get at least a 2.0 GPA. So it's not known up front. So if we haven't done a FAFSA yet, we can still be eligible for Ft3. So one of the requirements is to submit a FAFSA. So if you haven't done so, I recommend doing so now, just so then you're avoiding any backed up information and just getting on top of it kind of thing. What is the deadline to apply for the first time program? I think I already answered, or I think the deadline is, it's November for the pledge this year. It's usually in the middle or late of the semester. So usually around that time frame, I recommend just doing it now, just because it takes like less than 30 seconds to do. So another question, to confirm, we can still apply for Ft3, but in the meantime, we should pay fall tuition as long as my son qualifies, will receive a reimbursement. Yeah, so you can definitely do that. You can either not pay the tuition, and then there's IT put a little thing in the system where Ft3 students can still register for the next semester without needing to pay for that tuition. But some students and families do prefer to pay for the tuition up front and then get reimbursed. So basically up to the family/student how they want to handle that. And then, sorry, I missed one. How many units does a student who is a part of DSS have to take to qualify for tuition reimbursement? I believe for DSS students that are approved, it's around 9 units, but the student is going to need to follow up with the DSS office to make sure that that's on record on the student's file. So then that way, when we run the report at the end of the semester, that we know that they're eligible for the Ft3 program with only 9 units instead of 12. And then I see a question for this fall. I'm not sure what that's referring to.
That might have been connected to a previous question, Jesus.
Okay.
I think Rain is typing in an answer.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you for all of those answers in the presentation. Are there any other questions? Let's see, it looks like we got one more in the chat. Let's take one more.
Okay. So you can start classes on 8/23 without having paid tuition before you find out if he's Ft3 eligible. Yeah, so a student can start the semester without paying for, paying for tuition. And then at the end of the semester, that's when all students know whether or not they'll be eligible for Ft3. So it takes until the fall semester ends. So at some point in January, students will be notified whether or not they're eligible for Ft3 or not.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and then sorry, really quickly, again, if you have any questions, give us a call. I recommend calling our office because our email is kind of backed up. We're about a week and a half behind. So I recommend calling in just to get a quicker answer. And we're also, again, we're open in person. So you can also just stop by the campus if you're nearby, and then we can answer your question at the front desk.
Okay. And Jesus, thank you for all that information. And just to underscore, the deadline for the Ft3 program is October 1st. That's the deadline to do the pledge.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. Yeah, I forgot the date. It usually shifts around year after year, so it's October 1st this year, looks like.
Perfect. And we highly encourage everybody, all new students, to take advantage of Ft3 to get your first and second year covered. It is definitely worth it. And that's one of the perks of community college, that it's affordable, and we just made it even more affordable. So take advantage of that. And Jesus, I know you don't work directly with the scholarships, but since we have a bit of time, can you do a 1-minute spiel on the scholarships if you feel comfortable?
Yeah.
DVC offers and the deadline, the general deadline for that?
Yeah, for sure. So for DVC Internal Scholarships, I don't have a slide on it. But basically, DVC Internal Scholarships, they open up, I believe it's the end of October, so around October 31st, and the application process closes around the beginning or middle of February every year. So a student will need to be at least enrolled half-time, so that's at least 6 units in fall and spring of for example, the 21 and 22 academic year. They'll submit the application, which requires a personal statement, as well as I think a couple of letters of rec, which come from DVC staff or faculty. So that's something they'll hopefully be able to make connections with DVC staff or faculty to help them with the letter of rec requirement. And so then if they are eligible, then they'll be awarded for the following academic year. So that would be 22 to 23. So obviously doesn't come to effect till the following academic year, but still be nice. Obviously a scholarship is still something nice to have when it comes to student and helping pay for their educational cost. So there's we also have at DVC, we have our own scholarship office. Actually, it's not embedded with Fantrade as it is with other colleges. So as well as their own separate website. So you can just head over to dvc.edu/scholarships for more information on the exact dates as to when the scholarship season opens up again, which is usually around October 31st, as well as when it ends, and then as well as any other requirements. And we also have a few external scholarships listed on the DVC scholarship website as well. If you want to take a look at those, obviously since they're external, they require their own submitting the application to the particular organization, for example, and following up with that organization instead of with DVC.
Thank you. And a few other questions came in, Jesus, and I'm going to ask you to respond to one. There's a question about books. These need to be purchased if not covered by financial aid. And that is you would need to purchase them, but it depends on the kind of financial aid they have, right? Could
Yeah,
you speak to that?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so there's for example, the Pell Grant, which is was financial aid that's actually dispersed directly to students. They can, for a student, if they're eligible for that, they can actually use those funds to cover any educational costs. So that includes books. So it's up to the student to basically budget that accordingly and see what exactly what their costs are and how they can basically budgeting with their financial aid that they received. So again, you could be purchased. You can the bookstore is open, I think, currently as well. Or if not, they have all the books online, so you could pick up the books even at the bookstore, have them shipped to you. So yeah, so it depends on the financial aid that the student is awarded. Not every single student is eligible to receive cash aid like the Pell Grant. So so the financial aid information is on the student's insight. And again, if there are any questions, anything that's confusing, just give us a call. Student can give us a call, and then we'll be able to answer their questions and guide them in regards to what type of financial aid they received and how that's going to work out for the academic year.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jesus, and a virtual round of applause for you. You won't hear the audience, but we're all cheering for you.
Thank you.
And one thing I failed to mention at the very beginning is that at the end of this webinar, we will send an email to participants with resources and links to many of the things that we discussed today, and including our PowerPoint. So if you're feverishly taking notes, be reassured that we'll send you more of the info as well. Okay. And Tina, you are up next. We're going to transition over to Tina Wade, one of our counselors, to focus on transfer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for making time in your night to learn about transferring in DVC. So I have the pleasure of talking about transferring to universities, which is a very common path for DVC students. And let's see, so I represent Career and Transfer Services. We have a separate office that's dedicated just to helping your students focus on their career and transfer path. So anything that involves their plans after DVC, they can come to us and pop in for quick questions. We have an online tons of ways to contact us online as well. So let's get into it, because I think we might be running a little behind on time. So pardon me if I kind of fly through. So just to clarify, the definition of a transfer student is somebody who's finished high school or at least a GED and completed one regular semester, like a fall or spring term at a college or university. So typically students would start at DVC to complete their lower division requirements, usually entailing 60 units or more for public university transfers. And then once they transfer, then they would complete the rest of their 60 plus units or so at the university to complete their upper division requirements to earn a total of 120 units, totaling their bachelor's degree. Each university may have different minimums to decide who is defined as a transfer student. So for UCs and CSUs, which is our most common transfer pathway, the typical number that students are looking to fulfill here is a minimum of 60 transferable units. For private and out-of-state transfers, it's actually going to be quite variable. And so it's going to be dependent on the school that they're interested in. So some of them may be as low as 20 or even lower, and then other schools maybe 30, and other schools may err more towards the side of 60, like with UCs and CSUs. So why students should transfer from DVC? I heard a couple of questions about, considering other community colleges, and a lot of these facts are true for most community colleges: a lower cost for equivalent units and courses, smaller class sizes, which allows for more connections with instructors and letters of recommendation. We also offer excellent transfer preparation. Students can earn a certificate and an associate degree on their way out while they're planning to transfer. It's kind of a bonus degree. It also prepares students well for college and university academics and life as a transitional stage. And we also have community college students get special consideration for UCs, CSUs, and what's called the AICCU umbrella of private universities in California. So within the community college system, though, we do like to talk about the fact that we're #1 in transfers. We have the highest number of students transferring to Berkeley and to Davis. Considering we're not one of the largest schools, like we actually are right around 19,000 or so students, that's actually really notable. So if you'd like to learn more about DVC statistics and the transfer stats, we have a website right underneath there. It's on the DVC transfer page. Just click on where you can transfer. So the common question that we get is, how do I prepare for a transfer? How does my student prepare to transfer to a UC? University of California schools, as you can see, there are 9 across the state. Generally, the minimums include 60 UC transferable units. They have to have at least a 2.4 minimum transferable GPA to at least apply. If they're a non-resident student, you would need at least a 2.8 GPA. And then they would also need to complete the 7-course breadth pattern. It's kind of the general education spread, including 2 English courses. At DVC, it's called English 122 or a version of that. And then a critical thinking course, 1 math that's UC transferable, and then 4 courses from at least 2 different areas, including arts, humanities, behavioral social sciences, biological, physical sciences. To be a competitive UC applicant, you can see on the right-hand side, there's a little bit of a differentiation. And we're looking really, Berkeley, LA, San Diego, pretty much all of their majors are considered competitive or impacted, selective, and so, or capped, what have you. So they definitely want to be completing the major preparation courses as soon as possible. It would be ideal. Completing the general education or even IGETC, dependent on the major, which the counselor can help them determine if that would be a good idea. And then also obviously a competitive GPA in their transferable courses. So what is a competitive GPA for UC? We're looking at maybe 3.2 and above for most majors, except for engineering. And then except for Berkeley, LA, San Diego, typically we're looking more at like a 3.5 and above to be considered a competitive applicant. That's not saying that students who have lower than a 3.5 will not be admitted or are not strong candidates. They really do take a lot of things into consideration when they're reviewing applications. So I like to encourage students to just still apply and keep working hard. And, they see you, they see all of you. So just apply and see what happens. I've seen pretty miraculous things. With CSU transfers, the California State University system, it's also a very popular pathway for our students. There are 23 campuses across the state, as you can see on the right. As well, along with UCs, it's a 60 semester transferable units. These have to be CSU transferable units. And so they just want to check, make sure that your students checking with a counselor or somebody else to ensure that their units are transferable to the places where they want to go. Okay, so within those units, they have to have a 2.0 minimum GPA. If they're non-residents, a 2.4. Complete the golden 4 is what's called the 2 English courses, like I mentioned before, English 122 or a version of that, as well as a critical thinking course, 1 CSU transferable math, and 1 oral comm class, like a public speaking or debate class. For competitive CSU applicants, maybe some schools are getting more applicants than others. Typically the beach schools and the coastal schools have a lot of attention. So those students will really want to talk with a counselor about trying to complete the GE pattern, such as IGETC or CSU GE, completing major preparation, just like with UC applicants, earning a competitive GPA in their transferable courses. And then maybe also considering earning a transfer degree. We have these things now called the Associate Degree for Transfer, or ADT. It's known as, an ADT, but it's also called an Associate of Arts for Transfer, Associate of Science for Transfer. Sometimes if they align well with, if the degree aligns well with their major choice for transfer, then it's a great idea to prepare to earn one of these degrees and also get guaranteed admission basically to the CSU system. So we can talk more about that with students who are interested in that. Again, if it's really lined up with their major and they're interested in the CSU, then this could be a great option to just give them an extra competitive edge and or even guaranteed admission in some cases to certain campuses. And then they may be supplemental extra application materials required for some campuses like the beach ones, SLO, Long Beach, San Jose, San Diego. All right, so with private and independent schools and out of state, the requirements vary pretty widely. So it's really going to be imperative that the student begins researching their options for the schools and knowing the requirements and deadlines for each school as early as possible, just so that we're not caught off guard about like, oh, the application's actually due earlier than I had expected, or I need to prepare some sort of, portfolio sort of thing, or letters of recommendation that they had not prepared. So many schools do allow transferring with less than 60 units. So with the UCs and CSUs, 60 is a hard cutoff, whereas with these other schools, they set their own rules. And so we've seen students transfer with much less after a year, even after a semester in some cases. So it all depends on the university. Many schools recognize what we call the IGETC and the CSU GE breadth pattern, like the general education patterns. But the major articulation, the courses that they would want to take and should take that contribute towards their major choice upon transfer can be found maybe at this website, the Transfer Articulation website. But if it's not there, we have some resources available to help students map their major plans and make sure that they're on track for transferring elsewhere. There's some additional links on just out-of-state, private schools, and historically Black colleges and universities, which we also have a great guarantee pathway for our students who earn an associate degree for transfer. So in a nutshell, what we like to think about of preparing for a transfer at DVC, if we're going for a UC-CSU, again, it's going to be about 60 units at least. So if you look at this little pie chart on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see how those units may be divided. Each student's pie is going to be different in terms of the composition and the percentage of what their general education, major preparation, and electives cut is going to look like. So it's going to be dependent mostly on the major that they choose. So if they choose a liberal arts major or something that has generally lower units for the major, then they are going to see a lot more room in their schedule at DVC to take elective classes and to take as many general education classes as possible. Whereas maybe a student who's doing architecture, engineering type majors, and other STEM related majors, they're going to have a really heavy major preparation load, which they can look up on assist.org if it's a UC or CSU campus. And then, go to the Transfer Articulation website for DVC to find out for other schools if we have articulation for them. But yeah, so basically students will want to work with their counselors here to determine what to prioritize in their schedule, how to, how fast they should be going, and how many units and things like that should be planned, and all of that to make sure that we fit in the major prep as much as possible, as well as general education and elective courses if they need more units to get to 60. And then another note about timeline, and I'll share more about timeline, is the students usually want to prepare to apply for transfer about 6 to 11 months before starting at the new campus. And it sounds a little excessive, but if anybody's applied as a freshman applicant to UCs and CSUs, it's due in November, and it's the same for transfer students here. So students usually take 2 to 3 years or more, depending on where they place with math and English, the total units that they take each semester, their pace, like if students are half-time versus full-time, if they've earned any substandard grades along the way, if they repeat any courses, and then if they have a heavy or lighter major requirement. So I'm probably going to go through this really quickly, but we have 2 options for transfer students to complete general education. One is called IGETC, one is called CSU GE. One, the universal one that's accepted everywhere is IGETC. The CSU GE is only acceptable at CSU. So they're going to talk with their counselors about which one is the best choice for them. But most of our students are following IGETC because it's the most universal. As I mentioned before, if the student wants to research, and students should research, their major preparation requirements for transfer, they would go to this database called assist.org, and it has been severely revised. It's got a facelift, and so it's nice and purple and blue, and the counselors are happy to walk through this with students to show which courses are required and make them more competitive. We can also do that in the transfer center. If students still need more units to get to 60 units, after completing all the others, then they would want to take what's called an elective. It's basically any transferable course or unit that helps them to get to the 60 so that they can qualify for transfer. And they get to choose. It's hopefully a fun thing for students to maybe blow off steam. We have tons of kinesiology activity courses, from yoga to soccer, all kinds of things. So they can take their pick. We do get a lot of questions about TAG. And so if you hadn't heard about TAG, it stands for Transfer Admission Guarantee. And it is for the UC system. So students can earn guaranteed admission to the UC. And then they have the peace of mind of applying in September, the final September at DVC, and knowing that pretty much as long as they complete the requirements that are set out on the website, then they will be getting a ticket into the UC school without having any questions or, having any additional hoops to jump through. So it's a really beautiful thing. I encourage all UC transfer students to consider this, even if the TAG schools that are listed here, there are only 6 TAG schools eligible for this program. As you may notice, Berkeley, LA, San Diego are not on this list. They're just not able to offer TAG to students. So students would just apply the regular way for the rest of the schools. But if there's a school on here that they're interested in, they can choose one of those to do a TAG with, and then basically, like I said, just finish the requirements as stated on this website, and then they can kind of rest a little easier knowing that they will have a space waiting for them. And even if they do decide to accept admission to LA, Berkeley, or San Diego, or another school, they can still do TAG and then just say no thank you. So it's really just a backup option at the very least for students, which is why, and it's free. So I encourage everybody to go for it. It's just, there's no harm in doing it. So there's a website on there. If anybody would like, just Google UC TAG and you can find this long URL. But as I mentioned, they mentioned, the PowerPoint will be sent out. For guaranteed admission to a CSU, did you know that you can earn guaranteed admission to the CSU system? So it may not be the exact campus that the student wants if the campus is very selective, but they can be routed to another CSU campus that has space for them in their major. So they know that they'll also be going to a university to finish their bachelor's. They will also, students who earn an associate degree for transfer at DVC will also be guaranteed admission to several private schools from the AICCU system. Historically Black colleges and universities, and online universities. It's a brand new contract that the state drew up with Western Governors University and Southern New Hampshire University, fully online accredited universities. So they can finish in many ways by earning an ADT. So they should definitely talk with a counselor about this if they're not sure where they're wanting to go, but they know they want to transfer somewhere and earn an associate degree. It doesn't hurt to put on your resume. In the student's final year, a transfer student's final year at DVC, these are basically the deadlines that we're looking at having them complete. So just putting on their calendar that they want to start the UC application if that's where they're going in August, and start looking at the personal insight questions. Those are like the essays. The September is when they submit their TAG for the guarantee to UC. And then in October, November, that's when they could submit CSU applications. And then in November, they could submit their UC. They can certainly start working on it earlier if they wanted to get a preview of the application ahead of time. They just can't submit it until that final month. In the spring term, that's when the students will be updating their applications with their grades and telling them, like, this is my updated transcript, basically updating their Fafsa and reapplying for financial aid so that they can continue into their transfer university. And then they'll start getting good news from universities and getting admissions decisions back. Then they'll have to turn in their decisions about which campus they choose and sending in transcripts and all those good documents for the universities. So basically the student, as long as they continue to meet with a counselor, which we encourage them to do early and often. I kind of think about it like the dentist. If you meet with your dentist every 6 months, then that's a great idea. Continue to do that. Do that with your counselor as well, or have your students check in with their counselor or a counselor every 6 months or so, just to see in case anything has changed with university requirements, because things do change in the transfer world quite often, or their plans for their major, or they're adding another school to their transfer plan just as a backup, or they'd never heard about this new opportunity. We can always steer them in the right direction, give them a lot of resources, and help to realign their plan. Their education plan is basically just a list of their courses that they would take every semester, including their general education, lower division major prep, and electives if they need it. And students can do that by going to the DVC counseling office on the second floor of SSC or going to that website to schedule an appointment. We do have drop-ins available as well. That's been going all summer as well. DVC Career and Transfer Services, that's where I am. We were right next to counseling on the second floor in Pleasant Hill, and students, we would love to help them connect with university reps from all over, Berkeley, LA, East Bay, you name it, San Jose. They're all waiting to meet with your students and answer their questions. So we've got them lined up, also providing application how-to workshops for that final year to help them make sure they're not missing things, help with them with transfer research, learning about their options for majors and universities, just kind of turning over every rock and determining what the best fit would be. We also have drop-in counseling available in career and transfer services if they have a quick transfer question, which can usually be really helpful for students just to answer a quick question. You can come to us at second floor of SSC or go to our website. During open hours, they can reach us there. They can also send us an email in the off hours at that website. These are some additional transfer tools and resources. Not going to go over them now, but as we said, the PowerPoint will be sent out in case you wanted to sniff these out in your own time. But questions, we definitely would love for your students to connect with us by going to the DVC Transfer website for one-on-one assistance. They can talk to a counselor in a meeting every semester. We also have some ways to connect with students on LinkedIn, a newsletter, various social media outlets so that they don't miss out on any news. So I'm going to check out the questions. It looks like the team has been doing really well at answering questions. So I'm not sure if I'm missing anything or if it's just empty right now.
Thank you, Tina. It looks like it's empty at this time, but we do want to give a few seconds in case others want to add questions into the chat. And maybe I'll take the silence to emphasize two things. One is the importance of meeting with a counselor early and often, as Tina noted. And as you can tell, our counselors and our entire staff is fantastic. So there's quite a few, is it about 30 counselors, Tina, that we have on our team? 30-ish, both at the Pleasant Hill and the San Ramon campus. So in addition to all of the tips that we gave you today, we want to encourage you to also nudge your student to make an appointment with a counselor if they haven't already, to start their educational planning and to build a relationship with them to hopefully check in throughout their journey. And then the other note is that we focused on transfer because often that is the big question for many of our new students. But as you also heard through the presentation, there's other career options, certificates, and AAAS degrees that your students can enroll in. And often they can do all of that, and they can stack degrees and transfer. So in meeting with the counselor, the student can explore all of those options and what's best for them. And there's a few questions. There we go.
So first question, does a student have a greater chance of transferring to a UC or CSU if they have an associate's degree or a certificate? That's a great question. For CSUs, it does vary where we're planning to transfer. For a CSU, it definitely does give them an advantage if they're earning an associate degree for transfer in a similar major to their transfer major. So if I'm going into psychology at the CSUs and I'm earning the ADT, the associate degree for transfer in psychology, then that would certainly help me by giving me a slight GPA advantage when I'm applying to competitive schools. It would also give me that guaranteed admission that always is nice to have for the CSU system. So if I don't get into my top campus, then I can be offered a backup admission at another CSU campus. And so there are, for UCs, it's really more about completing the requirements by the stated times and then having the tag in hand. They don't typically give any, extra consideration for students who have associate's degrees or certificates, unless that associate degree or certificate is offers a lot of value to the student professionally and it relates to their major, and they talk about that in a meaningful way, and weave that into their responses for the personal insight questions. I suppose I could see that, but on its own, inherently, it does not give any student a leg up. For our next question, are counselors the best way to help students that are challenged with executive functioning? Maybe they will listen more than what they hear from parents. We are concerned about the student's ability to manage everything. Yeah, so if the student has, if student would like to work with a counselor in the general counseling, we also have DSS counseling for students who may have any executive functioning or learning differences. Sometimes it does help to hear from another person, an outside person, not your parent. And so, please send them to us. We'd love to help them just, get any facts straight and clarify any myths about transferring and maybe how to manage their college load based on some experiences that we've seen with our students in the past. So another question, should they really take 15 units a semester and summer classes, do they count towards 60? It really depends, the unit load per semester. It really depends on the students' other commitments that they're taking on. I believe before they had talked about, work commitments and other things that students have outside of school. And the unit load, 12 units is considered full-time. Anything above that is, dependent on the student. If they want to move faster, if they have a really demanding major, that might be something that we would recommend. For our STEM majors especially. Summer classes taken at a community college that are transferable certainly do count towards the 60 unit count. So that's another way that students can kind of get ahead of the pace is by taking classes over the summer or taking them in like those shorter terms. So it's a great way to spread them out a little bit and not have to take as many during the fall and spring. Another question is, does TAG have a GPA requirement? Excellent question. They certainly do. As you can imagine, they don't just give it away for free. So we do have GPA requirements. Typically, they start at like 2.7 for maybe Merced and Riverside for certain majors. They go all the way up to like 3.5 or so for engineering and other really high demand majors. Actually 3.6 I saw this year for certain high demand majors like computer science, business, engineering. Might see higher GPAs. It depends on the campus and the major. So let me actually plug in the TAG website into that answer so that you can dig into that a little more. On that website, they have a whole matrix that overviews all the requirements, including GPA minimums for each major and campus. I think that was, yes. Thank you, Rain, for answering the other questions.
Wonderful. It looks like we covered the questions. And once again, thank you to Tina, and a virtual round of applause for you too. We have become quite expert in our webinar presentations, but we recognize also, as we said earlier, that we're sharing a lot of information very quickly and that there may be questions later. So please take advantage of the contact information, the emails and the websites that both Tina and Jesus shared with you to follow up. And there is the chat option on most of our student services web pages as well for you to chat with a staff member if questions come up. And in the email that we send you, it'll take about a day for us to be able to send it to you, but in a day or so, you'll have some of these resources and some of the PowerPoints in addition to our office's contact information. And often you may not know where to go with your questions. So we're a good starting place also, and we can direct you in the right direction. So anybody want to add anything else? Tina, Jesus, Kenyatta? Okay. And Tina, I think we can stop your screen sharing. And I want to thank everyone who presented, who participated, our team on the chat, who are our invisible team responding to questions and helping with all the technology. Thank you to you as well. And participants, we look forward to hopefully seeing you on campus. I know some of you asked about activities. There will be some activities on campus and about 25–30% of our courses in person. We are working on campus as well, so hopefully we'll bump into you on campus. And most of the staff wear a name tag with the DVC logo, so you can identify us if you do have a question if you're there. So once again, thank you everyone. Good luck with the fall semester, and until soon.